The first time it snowed in Baton Rouge, people called it a miracle. The second time, they called 911. The third time, nobody called at all. Because by then, the cold had already taken their fingers, their power, their voices. I'm Dr. Tess Marlowe. I study weather patterns for a living, and what froze the South wasn't a polar vortex. It was something that found a place rich in hatred and decided to feed. And when it got too full, it spilled into the air as ice. When Hate Froze the South by NoSleep scribe. The first time it happened, they called it a miracle. Snow in Baton Rouge. Children ran barefoot onto porches and shrieked like it was Christmas. They scooped handfuls of white into their mouths. They made crooked angels on lawns that had never known winter. They filmed themselves laughing, posting proof, as if the world had finally decided to do something whimsical instead of cruel. But miracles don't come with emergency alerts. By midnight, the snow stopped being pretty. It stopped being light. It came down like something poured, like the sky had been holding a grudge. The roads glazed over, cars slid into ditches, power lines snapped under the weight of ice, whole neighborhoods went dark, and in the dark, the temperature dropped with the kind of speed that felt personal. People died with their phones in their hands. Some were found in their kitchens, still wearing aprons. Some were found curled in bathtubs with towels stuffed under doors, trying to keep warmth in, like you can keep a tide from coming through a crack. The news blamed unprecedented conditions. Meteorologists blamed polar vortex instability. Online people blamed each other. That was the part that made my stomach turn. Not the cold, the way it brought out what was already there, the way it fed. My name is Tess Marlowe. I'm an atmospheric researcher, and I used to believe weather was indifferent. I don't believe that anymore, because the cold that hit the South that year wasn't random. It was full, and it spilled over. You can track hatred like you track humidity if you stop pretending it's abstract. It has pressure, it has fronts, it moves, it gathers. The South was already a bowl that held heat too well. Thick air, slow summers, the kind of sun that makes tempers short and patience brittle. And for months before the first snow, the air had felt wrong. Not hot, charged. The first clue wasn't the temperature, it was the noise. I was in my office at LSU, half asleep under fluorescent lights, watching storm models crawl across the Gulf, when I heard shouting outside. Not organized, not even focused, just anger. Sharp, immediate, hungry. A man in the parking lot was screaming at a woman in a minivan, his face red and wet like he'd been boiled. He punched her window. The glass didn't break, but it spidered. She stared straight ahead, like if she looked at him, she'd become part of it. People nearby stood filming. No one moved to help. When I turned back to my monitor, the pressure map had shifted. Not dramatically, not enough to make the National Weather Service blink, but enough to make my skin crawl. A small circular depression had formed offshore, too neat, too centered, like an eye that hadn't opened all the way. My colleague Elias Reed stepped into my doorway with a paper cup of coffee and a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me you're seeing this," he said. He held out his phone, a clip from a rural Mississippi gas station, Two men arguing over nothing. One bump, a shove, words sharp enough to cut. Then the lights flickered. Not the whole store, just the strip directly above them. Dim, bright, dim, like something inhaling. When the first punch landed, the air above their heads shimmered. Not like heat, like distortion. A ripple, as if the atmosphere had briefly forgotten how to behave. Elias lowered the phone. "Do you feel it?" he asked. I did. The air had changed. The hairs on my arms lifted. The building's AC kicked on with a metallic groan, and for a second, the vents exhaled something that smelled like burnt pennies. "Something's building," I said, "and it's centered in the Gulf." Elias leaned over my shoulder. "Like a storm," he murmured. "No," I said, "because storms don't care if you hate your neighbor. This felt like something else, something listening." By the time the first snow came, we'd already cataloged the pattern. Hate spike, pressure dip, wind shear anomaly. Hate spike, static bloom, lightning without clouds. Hate spike, tornado warnings on clear days. It wasn't poetic, it was statistical. We tried to name it, because naming things makes them feel smaller. Elias called it the Gulf Anomaly. I called it the Mouth. Online, it already had a dozen names. The Blue Hunger, the Frost God, the Thing That Hears You, and the one that stuck like a splinter, the Overfill. The first time it ate, it was in Alabama. A high school football game turned into a brawl after a referee call. Parents stormed the field. Someone shoved a coach. Someone else pulled a knife. The crowd surged like a single organism. Above the stadium, a thunderhead formed in 10 minutes flat. Not a normal storm. It rolled in low and fast, dark as bruised fruit, and the lightning inside it didn't strike down. It struck sideways, a web of white cracks crawling across the sky. When the sirens started, people didn't run. They kept fighting. A tornado touched down half a mile away, shredding a trailer park, and the crowd still screamed at each other like the world hadn't changed. When the tornado lifted, the storm didn't move on. It hovered as if it was waiting for seconds. "This isn't weather," Elias said, voice wrecked. "No," I agreed. "It's behavior." 2 days later, we drove to the coast with equipment in the trunk and dread in our bones. The Gulf was gray, chopped by wind, the air tasting like salt and gasoline. We set up sensors on a pier, patched so many times it barely counted as wood. Elias watched the horizon. I watched the data. Then my reading spiked. A sudden plunge in temperature, localized, sharp, impossible. The air around us dropped 10 degrees in seconds. I looked up. The sky was clear, the sun was out, and yet my breath fogged. Elias exhaled slowly. "What the hell?" A sound moved across the water. Not thunder, not waves. A low, rolling murmur, like a crowd heard from far away. The surface of the Gulf rippled in a circle, perfectly round. Then it expanded, and for a second I saw something in it. Not a creature, not a face. A shape the air tried to hide, like something enormous beneath a sheet. Elias stepped back from the edge. "Tess," he said, voice thin, "tell me you saw that." "I did," I said, and the water went still. That night my inbox filled with messages. Most were spam. One was a single line from my own email address with no sent timestamp. You can't outmeasure hunger. I stared at it until my eyes burned, then typed back, "What are you?" The response came instantly. Full. The first lethal cold front hit Louisiana on a Tuesday. It didn't arrive. It kicked the door in. At 3:17 p.m., the temperature in New Orleans dropped from 72 to 36 in 12 minutes. At 3:30, it was 28. At 3:45, snow began to fall. Not flurries, thick, heavy sheets of white that made the air look grainy, like a TV losing signal. The city didn't know what to do with it. No salt trucks, no plows, no infrastructure built for ice. And ice didn't just coat the roads. It climbed. It crawled up telephone poles in jagged veins. It sealed doors shut. It crusted over windshields so fast you could watch it happen. I stood outside my building, staring up as snow fell into my hair, melting for half a second before the cold turned it brittle. Elias called me. "Grid's failing," he said. "Hospitals are switching to backup." "Why is it so fast?" I asked, though I already knew. Because this wasn't weather moving. It was something venting, something that had eaten too much and couldn't hold it. By nightfall, the deaths started stacking. A family in Lafayette died running a generator in their garage. A man in Biloxi froze in his car after sliding off the highway. He texted his sister for help, but his fingers stopped working before she could find him. A nursing home in Mobile lost power. Staff wrapped residents in blankets and prayed. A riot broke out at a Buc-ee's in North Texas. The cold didn't care. It wasn't interested in fairness. It wasn't interested in anything but balance. The hate had to go somewhere. And when it couldn't stay contained, it became cold, deep, biting, predatory. Snow in places that had never earned it. Ice in towns that didn't know how to survive it. People blamed climate change. They blamed the government. They blamed each other. And with every accusation, every screaming match, every post written like a knife, the cold deepened. It got under doors. It crept into lungs. It turned pipes into bombs. Then I started noticing the frost patterns. Not random. Faces. Not clear enough to prove, but clear enough to haunt. Twisted mouths. Hollow eyes. Teeth like cracks in glass. When I scraped frost off my window, I found a spiral underneath it, etched into the glass like it had been traced from the inside. I pressed my fingers to it. The glass was so cold it hurt. And in that pain, I heard something. A whisper that wasn't sound, but sensation. A thought pressed against my mind like a thumbprint. More. I jerked my hands back, heart hammering. Elias arrived an hour later, with his coat dusted in snow and his eyes too bright. "It's centered," he said. "The core isn't moving. It's anchored." "Where?" I asked. He hesitated. "Central Texas," he said. "A town called Jericho." I frowned. "Jericho? I've never heard of it." "Exactly," he said softly. He pulled out his laptop and showed me a satellite image, a dead spot, a small circle where the clouds swirled differently, where the cold radiated outward like a breath. Jericho sat in the center like a black pupil. Elliot looked at me. "We go there." He hesitated. "Don't your parents live in that area?" My eyes flicked to him involuntarily, then away. They do. I haven't been able to reach them since this started. Outside, the wind moaned against the building like something trying to get in. I stared at the map, at the eye, at the place the cold was born, and I thought with sudden clarity, if it's feeding on hate, then it isn't causing it, it's harvesting it, which meant the South didn't attract it because of geography. It attracted it because of abundance, because we were already full of what it wanted. We drove through the ice, not the pretty kind that coats trees and glass, the kind that makes every mile feel like a gamble. The highways were graveyards of abandoned cars, some still running with doors open, as if the people inside had stepped out and never came back. Billboards were rimed in frost, their cheerful slogans half erased. Welcome to Texas, where the future is bright. The word bright was buried under ice so thick it looked like bone. The closer we got to Jericho, the quieter the world became. Not peaceful, hushed, like a room holding its breath. The radio crackled with emergency broadcasts until it didn't. Then there was only static, something with rhythm, a faint pulse underneath it. Elliot gripped the wheel hard enough his knuckles went pale. You okay? I asked. My brother called, he said. The way he said it made my throat tighten. Pastor Reed? I asked. Elias nodded once. He said his church is full, Elias said. Not with people, with anger, like it's leaking out of them. What does that mean? Elias swallowed. He said a woman came in begging for prayer, he said, and while she cried, she started saying things, horrible things, about her kids, about herself, about wanting everyone to suffer. He glanced at me, eyes wet. She didn't even look like she knew she was saying it. I stared out at the blank white fields, trees bowed under ice. Maybe it's not just feeding, I whispered. Maybe it's stirring. Elias didn't answer, because we both knew that was worse. Jericho didn't look like a town. It looked like a mistake. The road into it was unplowed, the signs half buried. The buildings were small, low, old. Gas station, diner, a church with a crooked steeple. No lights, no smoke, no footprints. It was too still, like it had been erased. We parked near the diner. Our tires crunched on ice that sounded like teeth. The cold hit like a slap. Not just temperature, presence. It felt thick, as if the air had weight. Elias whispered, "Hear that?" At first I thought he meant the wind, but there was something else, a low, constant murmur beneath everything, not coming from any direction, coming from everywhere, like voices trapped under ice. We walked toward the New Mercy Baptist Church, because churches are where people go when they don't know what else to do. The doors were opened. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. Inside, the pews were coated in frost. Hymnals sat in neat rows, their pages stuck together. Snow dusted the aisle like someone had sprinkled it carefully. At the altar, the cross was rimed in ice so thick it looked grown. And behind it, something throbbed, a pressure in my skull. Elias took a step forward. "Tess," he said, voice shaking, "my readings are..." He didn't finish because the air in front of us shifted like a curtain moving without wind, and then the cold moved, not drifting, not blowing, reaching. It poured down the aisle in a wave, and as it passed, the frost patterns changed. Faces bloomed in the ice like bruises. A man's mouth opened in a silent scream. A woman's eyes squeezed shut in fury. A child's face twisted into something too old. My breath hitched, and then the whisper pressed into my mind again, stronger now. So much to eat. Elias staggered, hand flying to his head. His breath was fogging dark gray. Ice started frosting his clothing. "No," he gasped. "No!" He wasn't looking at the altar. He was looking at me. His eyes narrowed, filling with something sharp and unfamiliar. And I understood. It wasn't just feeding on hate out there. It was extracting it in here, pulling it up like oil. Every resentment, every regret, every old wound, turning us into wells. A memory slammed into me. My mother's face the day I left home. Her eyes wet, her mouth tight. "You think you're better than us now." Another memory. My own voice, cruel and sharp. "I am better than this place." Shame hit like a hot coal. The cold around us trembled. It liked that. Elias's mouth twisted. "You never wanted to save anyone," he said suddenly. "You wanted to prove you were right." The words hit like a punch. I stared at him. "That's not..." But even as I denied it, part of me flinched, because the entity was holding up a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. They just choose what to show. The air behind the altar thickened, condensing into shape. Not a body, a storm given outline, a towering column of frost and wind, lightning trapped inside like nerves. Its center was a dark hollow, and in that hollow I saw movement, like a mouth chewing. The cold surged. The whisper became a chorus. "Give, give, give." Elias took a step toward it, eyes glassy. "Tess," he said, voice flat, "maybe it's supposed to happen." I grabbed his arm, hard enough to hurt. "No," I said. My teeth chattered, not from cold, but from fury. Fury at the thing, at the town, at myself. And I felt the entity perk up. Fury was food. I forced my grip to loosen, forced my breath to slow. I thought of every reason I'd come here. Not for proof, not for pride, for the people freezing in their homes, for the ones who would die tonight if this didn't stop, for Elias's brother, for the child faces in the frost. And then I did something that felt like tearing my own skin off. I forgave, not the entity, not the hate, but myself, for leaving, for judging, for thinking distance made me clean. I let the shame exist without feeding it. I let the anger pass through me without clenching around it. The entity shuddered. The cold wavered like it had reached for something and found air. The whisper sharpened into panic. "No, more." I stepped forward, hands shaking, and spoke aloud. "You can't have me," I said. My voice was small, but it was steady. "I'm not a well," I whispered. "I'm not your harvest." The storm shape convulsed. Lightning snapped inside it, bright enough to make the ice faces flash. Elias blinked, like waking. "Tess?" he croaked. The entity surged again, desperate. and I felt it reach for the easiest thing in me, hate, the old familiar heat of it, the part of me that wanted to blame, to lash, to punish. I clenched my jaw and refused it. The cold screamed, not with sound, with pressure, with the sensation of something enormous starving. The air cracked. Frost shattered off the pews like glass. And then the storm collapsed inward, folding like a dying lung. The cold imploded into a tight spiral behind the altar, and for one terrible second, I thought it would pull us in with it. But instead, it burst. The church windows blew out in a spray of ice and snow. Wind roared through the building, ripping hymnals from pews and scattering pages like frightened birds. The cold snapped and writhed, trying to reform, trying to cling. But it couldn't, not without fuel. Outside, the sky split open, not with lightning, with rain, warm rain. It fell hard, punching holes in the snow, hissing as it hit ice. The sound was almost unbearable, not because it was loud, because it was relief. Elias and I stumbled out of the church into the downpour, blinking like we'd been underwater. The town looked the same, dead, frozen, blank. But the air was changing. The wind shifted. The temperature rose, slow and trembling, like a body trying to remember how to live. Elias sank to his knees in the slush, breathing hard. "What did you do?" he rasped. "I didn't fight it," I said. The words tasted strange, like a new language. I stopped giving it what it wanted. We didn't stay in Jericho long. We drove back through thawing roads, past cars half buried in melting snow, past trees dripping ice like tears. The damage was done. People were dead. Homes were ruined. But the cold wasn't spreading anymore. The forecast shift from catastrophe to recovery. The emergency alerts slowed, and in the quiet that followed, something in me ached, because stopping it hadn't felt like victory. It had felt like holding your breath underwater until your lungs scream. It had felt like surviving yourself. Epilogue, DAAA, After Action Weather Brief. Department of Anomaly Analysis and Administration, Atmospheric Anomaly Division, AAD. File status, restricted, internal use only. Case ID, DAAA AAD 240117. Overfill. Region of effect, Southern United States primary, Gulf Coast origin. Threat classification, yellow-red. Summary. Atmospheric anomaly localized over southern U.S. demonstrated measurable correlation with high-density hostile social activity, outrage clustering, crowd violence, coordinated harassment. Upon saturation threshold, excess discharge presented as rapid onset lethal cold, inconsistent with known meteorological behavior, including temperature drops exceeding forecasted rates by greater than 900%, snow ice precipitation without expected cloud structure, repeating frost morphology resembling facial impressions and spiral geometry. Assessment. Anomaly exhibits metabolic behavior. It does not generate hostility affect. It harvests it. Key observations. Cycle identified. Hostility cluster event. Micropressure collapse. Wind shear bloom. Static increase. Thermal inversion failure. Overflow event. 3:17 Central Standard Time, New Orleans sector, 72 degrees Fahrenheit to 36 degrees Fahrenheit within 12 minutes. 3:45 Central Standard Time, snow initiation without sufficient moisture signature. Acoustic artifact. Survivors report low-frequency murmur beneath ambient wind. Recovered audio resembles distant crowd noise. Anchor site, Jericho, Texas. Unincorporated limited records. Status, quarantine, soft. Note, persistent microclimate instability post-event. Persons of interest. POI number 1, Dr. Tess Marlowe. POI number 2, Elias Reed. Debriefed under cover story protocol, weather infrastructure failure, and released. Commentary. POI 1's testimony indicates anomaly weakened when she denied emotional nutrient, consistent with engagement parasitic entities. Containment. Physical containment not applicable. Recommended strategy. Starvation mitigation. Reduce hostility catalysts. Minimize outrage amplification. Warning. Force escalation may accelerate saturation. Recurrence. March redacted 2024, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Wind chilled frost observed at 68 degrees Fahrenheit ambient temperature, lasting 2 minutes. Morphology, spiral plus facial impression, smiling configuration. POI 1 reported identical morphology on personal resident windows every morning when she awakens, regardless of ambient temperature. Final note, handwritten addendum. We keep calling it weather because that's the only word the public will accept, but it behaves like appetite. It gathers where people gather. It swells where anger is cheap. It discharges when it can't hold what it's taken. The South didn't trigger the cold. It fed it, and we will feed it again. End report.